All right. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right. Perfect. Well, we're having a big screen like you can see, and we'll just do audio through the computer here. So let me grab my. Well, first of all, of course, thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate it. Certainly ought to be a fun time. So first of all, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of who you are, and what it's like to be King Arthur.
Well, my name's actually Arthur Uther Pendragon. I'm generally known as King Arthur. I'm a senior druid and pagan priest, and I lead rituals at Stonehenge. But more than that, I'm the head of a specific kind of druid order. I'm the head of what's been come to be regarded as the warrior arm of the druid movement, the political warrior arm, which is the loyal Arthurian warband. Um, and loyal was added when I became a druid order. It doesn't actually mean anything except it gives us the ability in court to say, actually, we're not breaking the law, we are the law.
Very interesting. So one of the big questions we had a couple people ask about this is like what are the druids like today? Obviously, we're sort of familiar with the idea of the druids from TV and movies and whatnot. But what are they like today and what are they like in the past? And sort of what's the through line there, the continuity?
Right. Well, when you think of druidry, you got to realize what a druid is, and a druid is many things and always was. The Celtic druids, in particular, were both at one the lawmakers, the lawgivers, the kingmakers, the scientists of the day, the naturalists of the day, and also the astronomers of the day. So they knew what time of day, what time of year it was. Now, the proto druids who came before them, the sort of people who would build places like Stonehenge, basically would worship on the longest, the shortest, the equal days. And that's what Stonehenge is used for to this day. So the druids of today try to emulate what they believed the ancient druids were doing. So we know factually from not only history and archaeology, but from a number of folklore sources, that Stonehenge was used as a meeting place at the longest, the shortest, and the equal days. Now, above that, we know very little of that time. But we do know if they were coming at the longest, the shortest, and the equal days, they were celebrating what Stonehenge, for instance, is aligned for. And it is aligned with the dawn of sun for the longest day. So what we do to this day is we celebrate the dawn of the longest day. We also celebrate the nearest sun of the season. So that will be after the event for the winter solstice and the equinoxes in March and September, which is the equal time of year. So that's what we do at Stonehenge. Above and beyond that, druids tend to live as close to nature as they possibly can. And so druids are naturally led into many of the environmental pursuits, and certainly caring for the environment can be viewed in a number of different ways. As I said a moment ago, my order is regarded as a sort of warrior arm of the Druid movement. And that all started at a major campaign over here that you may or may not have heard of, but it was called the Newbury Bypass. And what happened was over a number of months, they were evicting a number of different protest sites. I was evicted from the very first, and I was also evicted from a number of others. And the very last was, in fact, my own camp that I set up that we called Camelot. Now, at that time, other senior druids had come from time to time, but they had gone to the press and said, actually, we are apolitical as druids. It's a spiritual movement. Now, so because we are apolitical, we don't care whether the bypass is built or not. We're just here to say a blessing for the trees. Well, to me, that sounded more like a requiem mass. So, and it posed the question, which I answered in my book, which is, who's the real druid? The guy on the ground in the white frock, as I call it, or the guy up the tree risking his life? I found out the next day because they came in to evict and I was up there. So the answer was the third way, the guy up the tree in the white frock. And so a lot of the other senior druids used to say things to me like, well, Arthur, the trouble with you and your druids is you're always getting arrested. Now, how can you be a druid when you're always getting arrested? To which I answered, I don't know a better place to fight for justice than in a court of law. And that was when I changed the name of my order from the Arthurian Warband to the Loyal Arthurian Warband. So we could say we're not breaking the law. We, in fact, are the law. Some years on, some years later, most of the senior druids who ummed and ahed at me back in the day, in the 90s, and said, well, you know, you're always getting arrested. Now, if there's any problems environmentally or libertarian-wise, who they're going to call. It's a bit like being Ghostbusters. I mean, they get hold of me and say, Arthur, what do we do about this? And the reality is I have taken the government to court as many times as they've taken me to court, and that's quite a number of occasions. Back in 1998, in November of 1998, I went to European Court of Human Rights at Strasbourg fighting over access to Stonehenge and literally saying that the government had no right to put an exclusion zone in place because that's what they had done throughout the mid-80s to the mid-90s. In fact, it went through all the way up until I took it to the European Court. Now, I took it to the European Court in 1998. The European Court ruled against me and said the government did have a right to have an exclusion zone, but only if they could prove it was in the interest of national security, which of course they couldn't. We got in, and basically the authorities at the time, English Heritage and Wiltshire Police, Wiltshire Council, and everybody thought to themselves, well, Arthur, we'll give you enough rope and you'll hang yourself. They said, look, you've always said it will be self-policing. Guess what? We're putting you in charge of the voluntary stewards. Well, it's passed off peacefully ever since, and we still get in 4 times a year. But the young barrister who done the paperwork for me and assisted me in that particular court case is now the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It was Keir Starmer when he was a civil rights lawyer. He assisted me in taking them to the European Court.
Very interesting.
So that's what I do these days as a druid. And I also, you know, wind them up regularly and run for Parliament as well.
So you mentioned that with the druids, there's a very strong sort of nature element to it. What are sort of druid beliefs like? I'm very unfamiliar with that side of it.
Well, if in your mind's eye you just think pagan priest, that's very close to what a druid is in today's time and place, as it were. There's a misconception. There's a big misconception about paganism, though, and the big misconception is that we worship nature. We don't worship nature. We worship the divine, but we worship the divine through nature because we see the divine in all things around us. And the druid's job as the priest is to pass that on to not the congregation, but the circle, because we're all equal in the pagan religion and we meet in circles, and it's called a circle, which is very akin to, if you think about it, the round table. It's, you know, there is no head as such. And basically the modern druid is not only the part of the priest caste, he also does all the same things that were done before. Hang on, I've got something on my screen has come up. Is that back?
Yeah. All good.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So the modern druid is still very much doing the same sort of thing. Now, if you think about Stonehenge, for instance, now actually the word Stonehenge doesn't make sense because a henge is a bank and ditch, and a stone structure is a stone structure. So there is no such thing as Stonehenge, okay? There was a henge there long before the great monoliths were put up. And basically, before that, there were a number of post holes in a circle, and a number of different stones were put into that circle to form a henge. And what happened was the priest cast of the time, the proto druids, would come along and they'd look at shadows and they'd look at alignments and say, okay, longest day will be, in 2 days' time, 3 days' time, it's tomorrow. So they would look, and that was wizardry. Wizardry meaning wise man. So a druid is a wise man, and is someone who is akin to nature and can follow the signs of nature. And if you think about it, it's very important to the ancients that they got it right, because at the time the henge was built, for instance, we were turning over from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists. If they got it wrong and planted at the wrong time of year, the frost would get it and the whole community would be wiped out. So they had to rely on these signs, and these people who interpreted these signs, who were the priest caste of their time or the druid of their day in future times. And the one thing with history is you've got to realize that it's always written from a different point in time. So it's because it's written from a different point in time that you get the whole thing about the Arthurian legend, and you get the whole thing about what I call the Hollywood image, which is, plate armor and everything like that. I mean, even if they had plate armor in Arthurian times, they couldn't have stayed on the horse because the stirrup hadn't come over from Spain until the Norman conquest, which was far later. Now, I believe that there are 3 Arthurs and 3 Arthurian ages, okay? So there's a pre-Roman archetypal Welsh, there's a post-Roman Dark Age British, and there's a post-Thatcher, and I'm the post-Thatcher. That's really that simple. But when you think about it, a lot of the stuff that you think about the Arthurian legend was written in the 1400s, the 1200s. And if you go back to the original sources, you will see that from the original Welsh, from the Mabinogion, he was little more than a pig rustler who became a warlord. But the thing is, when you hear the phrase Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, you have to substitute in your mind's eye the word chieftain for king, because there was no King Arthur. There was a chieftain, yeah? And the same with knight, it's merely a mounted warrior. And a mounted warrior or a mounted horseman, it's a very little difference between the Arthur of that age, of either of them, pre or post-Roman and post-Thatcher. The only difference is now I'm riding an iron horse, a motorcycle. But everything else is pretty much similar. I mean, this hat, for instance, it's got a circlet, which is a crown, if you like. It's a modern take on a crowned helmet from history. But looking at history, imagine the archaeologists of the future. Now, one of the things about Druidry that I always come across is people saying, but weren't they into human sacrifice? Now, as I've already explained, they were most certainly the judiciary of the day. Okay, so put yourself forward for a moment 500 years and looking at photographs and stuff like that from death row in America. And those photographs that you're looking back on from the next 500 years will show a vicar there with a dog collar. So you'll say, well, there was a priest there. Well, you and I know he was there to administer last rites to someone who was sentenced to death. And that's exactly the same as Romans were saying about the Druids. They were saying, well, they're there, it's human sacrifice. How do you know it wasn't a judiciary in process? Mm-hmm. So it all depends where you sit in history and where you sit in time as to how you view things.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the big questions that we had people ask about is sort of why is King Arthur so enduring? This idea of King Arthur and the Druids. You talked about the Druids before the Romans and Arthur before the Romans, centuries ago, and yet he's still someone that means something to people and still very impactful to I think a lot of individuals, still popular in Hollywood, as you mentioned. What sort of makes him
Yeah,
so long lasting?
basically, it's just two things. It's the hero figure, and that's a world thing. It's not just, Arthur. The returning hero is a message that is written through all the scriptures and through all the folklore worldwide. Every nation has its sort of returning hero. That's just a thing that's out there. But the reason why Arthur fulfills that, if you like, and it is so enduring, is not because of his name, but his deeds. The Arthur of old, I mean, even if the original Arthur was no more than a pig rustler who went out and fought major battles and won, he made a name for himself. The pre-Roman, the post-Roman archetypal, if you like, for Hollywood, certainly, the sort of dark age Saxon slaying Arthur was, again, a great battle chieftain. And in the future, they're going to look back at my life and say, well, this guy who, this Arthur, this third Arthur, who took these European court cases, who freed up Stonehenge, who did this, did that, and did whatever, And they now, to me, I believe the same spirit dwells within. Now, that doesn't mean I believe I'm what one could refer to as a reincarnation. I believe that the Arthur figure, we need Arthur and he needs to be here. And the Arthur figure is always here in one form or another. And that's the same for all the other heroes of all the other religions, all the other spiritualities, and all the other nations. Now, as opposed to taking it with ancient times, I mean, it was often thought would. And it was when Britain, the land itself, needed him most. And from that point of view, if you look around at the 21st century and see what a mess this world is in, it would surprise me if the Arthur and all the other heroes and all the other mythologies, all the other sleeping heroes throughout all the other nations weren't back now, because if this isn't the time of greatest need, I don't know what is.
So what's it like sort of trying to live up to that legacy of Arthur? I mean, that's obviously, big shoes to fill in many ways.
Yeah, very much so. And all I particularly can do is my best. And it's the same with all members of my order. We just do our best. I mean, we swear to speak the truth, to honour our spoken word, and to be just and fair in all our dealings. We swear to truth, honour, and justice. And we try to live by that creed and do the best we can and just never back down. And that's what we do. And that is how we try to live. And, there's a book out there at the moment that I co-authored that's called The Trials of Arthur. And it's got a lot of this in, but it's also got a lot of the 90s protest movement and what we were doing and how many times I went to jail and all things I was fighting for at the time. But, I'm not going to live on past glories or it's what you do. Arthur is what Arthur does. And yes, it's big shoes to fill. But by the same token, Arthur just gets up and does it. I mean, I wake up and I think, who are you, Arthur? What you got to do? Well, try and make it a better place. All right, get on with it then. Including spreading the word, which is what I'm doing now.
And I think that's a very healthy way of thinking about it, of just sort of, what can I do today? I like that sort of mantra. So you've heard enough of my questions. So I'm curious if anyone here in the audience has questions that you'd like answered. And if you like to, you come down here like that. Yes, we have someone coming down right now.
Okay, so my question is, with the previous harvest moon, did you guys have any celebrations that commemorated the switching or the new harvest moon?
I didn't hear the last half of the question, but I heard the first half about harvest moon and celebrations, and
Yeah.
yes, we always have celebrations. 13 new moons, 13 full moons, and from that point of view, if we're not in, and that's it to us. They are celebrations. You've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, our spirituality and as druids is we will lead the celebrations, and they are celebrations which pretty well annoys our government and our authorities when we turn up at Stonehenge and celebrate. They would rather we turned up and worshipped in the way that they see worship, not in the way we do. But yes, it's a celebration, and the ancient and Stonehenge days, and they had feasts and celebrations, and that's what we do to this day. But we also, yes, we go out to woody glades usually to celebrate the agricultural festivals and also to celebrate the moons.
Right. And then also, my last question is, do you feel like the media does a good representation of showing what Arthur and the Druids are in terms of like, say, the movie Camelot and BBC Merlin, or even Sword in the Stone?
Um, well, they show a good representative of the feeling
Yeah,
of
like it's
Arthur.
almost like
But
romantic.
historically, they're as bad as First Blood. And they're you know they're not great when it comes to historical facts, but they are good when it comes to the feeling.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, Arthur and the Knights of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, like I say, if you substitute the word chieftain and mounted warrior, that gets you a lot closer to what it was like. But if you think about it, they were a light cavalry unit that was flying around the nation, fighting different causes here, there, and everywhere.
Right.
And when they turn up, right, and this is the way I explain Camelot. When they turn up, Arthur would say to the chieftain, the local chieftain, who latterly would be called a king when some historians writing about him 500 years later. And he'd say to the local chieftain, look, but do yourself a favour, put a hill fort there. And of
Yeah.
course, that in time became known as Arthur's Fort. And then latterly would become known as Camelot. And that's why you have so many places around these isles that claim to be Camelot. For
Right.
that very reason, it was a nomadic court. It was a light cavalry unit that travelled around with a nomadic court from place to place, assisting different tribes. And they were tribes then, they weren't kingdoms, but it's been written out, but in latterly as kingdoms. So you get all these kings of Leonese and all these mystical places in the Hollywood image. But it is still true to the brotherhood and the nobility with a small n
Mhm.
of Arthur and what I now call a war band. I mean, my group is called the Loyal Arthurian War Band. It's not called the Knights of the Round Table because we're not knights and we
Nice.
haven't got a round table. We're warriors. And we always were.
Mhm.
The Arthur of old was, if nothing else, he was a leader of a light cavalry unit. He was a warrior, and so was his tribe.
And thank you. But I think I also wanted to ask if you had your own Excalibur.
Wait there.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Can you say that?
That's wonderful.
that is such like intricate designing on that. Oh.
So, any other questions? Who would like to ask next? So I have one you with the Druids having like an oral tradition, sort of the stories being passed down from one person to another without much writing. Does having sort of a written tradition today make it much sort of harder or difficult? Like what challenges does that bring? I know it's kind of a weird question, but
It's not because it goes back to what I was saying earlier about death row and the priest at death row. Even with all the technology that's here today and all the records there are today, it's still going to be wrong. In 500 years' time, they're still going to say about this meeting now something wrong. Somebody will find somewhere on an archive, they'll find this recording, or they'll find something there and they'll say, oh, Arthur was here at this university in America. Well, I wasn't, but they'll still get it wrong. And so, yes, with the oral tradition, it was difficult, but you had to, memorize things and it was passed on that. And that was the only way it was passed on. Now, even with, books, films and everything else, they're still getting it wrong. And, it's gone again.
we can still see you.
Oh, right. No, I couldn't see you. I can now. But yeah, I mean, one of the biggest sort of sayings at this moment in time is fake news, fake news. Well, everything's fake news. I mean, it's very difficult to, even when you've got all the technology at your disposal that we have now, it's still very difficult to know what really happened. I mean, if you go to a party and something happens and there's 12 people there, you've got 12 different witness statements, 12 different views of what occurred. And that's the same to this day. So with oral tradition, it was that much harder.
So one other question which I had, so how did you first sort of feel like your kinship with King Arthur? Like what's the story behind you and Arthur? How did I guess there's a weird way of phrasing it, but how did y'all meet in a way?
I used to be known by a number of names, and I was sat around a friend's squad. I was the head of a bike gang at the time, a motorcycle club, and one of the names I was known as was King John because we used to meet at King John's Castle, and King John's Castle, it wasn't even a castle, and it didn't belong to King John, but it was called that locally because King John stopped at this particular hunting lodge on the way to seal the Magna Carta. So it was known as King John's Castle. Well, I used to have meetings there and parties there on full moons because I was already a pagan, but it wasn't for mystical reasons that it was on full moons. You had to ride down the towpath of a canal to get there. And the only time you could see to do that and have the parties was on a full moon. If it wasn't a full moon, you'd end up with motorbikes in the canal. And not good. So one of the names I was known as was King John. Anyway, I sat down around a friend's squat and I wrote my 24341883, which is my former army regimental number because I was in the army. I wrote down YT008921C, which is my national insurance number. I wrote down my name. I wrote down all the nicknames, and I was known by many different names around the country. And in the middle of it, I wrote King John on this little plank of wood, as it were. And I passed it to my friend who was living in the squat and always wanting a play on words, being a druid, as it were, but I didn't know I was a druid then. I said, I'm bored, as I passed him this board, you see. So he looked at it and he said, you're not King John. I said, no, and I'm not Bacardi and I'm not Mad Dog and I'm not. And I went through some of the names I'd written on this little plank of wood. He said, no, I mean, you're not King John. You're King Arthur, the one to future king. And I thought, whoa, something clicked. So I went to his solicitors and I said, I want to change my name to Arthur Uther Pendragon. And they said to me, okay, come back Wednesday. I went back Wednesday and they put Arthur Uther Pendragon. I said, I'll initial it. You spelled it wrong. It should be Uther. And they said, no, can't do that. Come back tomorrow. So I went back the next day, right? The next day, which was the 11th of June. A couple of years later, I'm down in Glastonbury, where I've then moved to, and I'm starting to form the war band, get my order together, and I'm on this path by then. And I come across a reference to a book that was written in the 1400s. And I always thought the whole thing about Arthur and Guinevere being taken from them finding the grave at Glastonbury Abbey was just, basically, it was just the monks doing this to get people there at the time. But there was this reference to something that appeared in a book. And it said, from where they took the bodies away, and hard by, because it was written in Old English, it said, and hard by another appeared, another mystic appeared. And it was a walnut tree that flowered but once a year on St. Barnabas's Day, the 11th of June. And I thought, that's why they got it wrong on the 10th then, because I was supposed to change my name on the 11th. Coincidence? Maybe. But my life has been a number of coincidences, and they've just fallen into place. Millions of coincidences just like that. I mean, I met the Druids on top of Glastonbury Tor in Beltane 1990. And one of the Druids said to me, and I wasn't a Druid order then, I was just a warrior order. Said to me, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm up at Stonehenge. I'm living between a dead tree and a living tree. I've got a hammock slung between the two, a tarp over the top, and I'm picketing Stonehenge to get Stonehenge freed up so we can all go there at least 4 times a year. And he said, bloody hell, you're more of a Druid than I am. And I thought, well, I probably am. And that's when I put the L in front of and called it Lord Arthurian Warband. I mean, but it's all, and people say to me, how do you know you're Druid? I always say, I never knew I was a Druid till I met other Druids, and they told me I was. And it was the same. I didn't know I was Arthur until somebody told me I was. And once they did, I thought, yeah, okay. And I said to them, I'm going for this. I ain't coming back. You've lost the president of your bike club if I go this way. And I did. I went to solicitors the next day. But another thing, right? And this is an amazing fact as well. I went into the solicitors, and apart from them doing it wrong and getting the spelling wrong, also they said to me, actually, funnily enough, if you'd have come in last year or before now, you could not have changed your name because we were part of Christendom. But we are now, as of this year, 1986, regarded as a multicultural nation. Therefore, it's no longer regarded as a Christian name because we're not part of Christendom. It's a forename, and you can change a forename. Prior to that, you couldn't, because I knew a guy at school, and when Elvis died, he changed his name to Elvis Aaron Presley. But he couldn't. He had to be Ronald Elvis Aaron Presley, because at that time, you couldn't change a Christian name. And it wasn't until 86 when I went in that you could, which was another coincidence. But the funny thing is, I don't know if you're familiar with the song, but there's a song that says there's a guy who works in a chip shop thinks he's Elvis. That's exactly what my mate Ronald Elvis Aaron Presley used to do. He used to work in a chip shop. So I'm sure that song's named after him.
Huh. Very cool. One other question. So this is one someone asked from the audience. With English history, there, of course, there are a lot of sort of notable figures across time. And are there any people that you think sort of capture well sort of this, not Arthur himself, but sort of the spirit of Arthur? Like, who do you look up to in English history across time? Outside of course, King Arthur.
Well, outside of Arthur, well, there's one person that comes to mind immediately, and that's a fellow Druid. Now, you may not know this person was a Druid, but yeah, Winston Churchill was a Druid. He was a member of the Ancient and Archaeological Order of Druids, and he wrote a history of Britain. And when it comes to Arthur, right, he's misquoted, and they always say he said, you know, if Arthur never existed, he should have. But what he actually said was all this and more and much more besides. But when you give it the way it's read and the way people will say it's read, being a druid, you see, I do everything and it's all in threes, right? So, like I said, and at Newbury, who's the druid? The guy on the ground, the guy up the tree. Well, the third wave is a guy up the tree in the white frock. Just the same, I decided as another druid, I would finish Churchill's quote. So if he said, if King Arthur never existed, he should have, I finished it with, and if he didn't, he bloody well does now.
Wonderful. I like it. That's nice. So, any other questions from the audience? Want to ask?
Hi there. My question is,
Hi.
so you mentioned that you formed your own war band. What was that like? What were some challenges? And are you happy, I guess, with the results?
Yes, I'm very happy with the results. And what I done initially was I went both ends of the spectrum, as it were, for want of a better word, because at the time I put an ad in a biker magazine to try and get a hold of some warriors, and I also put an ad in Mensa's magazine because I'm also in Mensa, and I got various responses from both. And I started gathering people around me and building my own warband, my own tribe, as it were. But most of the people who came to the case to this day, I actually meet. And so it's not just people that get hold of me and say, I'd like to be in your warband. You know, I will. Our way of initiation is by what I call raising, which is dubbing them on the shoulder with Excalibur and raising them. And the raising is they kneel before the sword of Britain. Then I raise them up and hug them and welcome to the warband. So, and that's male and female. But, you know, there are warrior priestesses, there are knights, there are a number of different types. But basically, with a number of druid orders that were going around at the time, there were different sort of orders. There were teaching orders who would do correspondence courses. And I always said the difference between my druids and the druids of those orders were I have actually met everyone in my order, because if I haven't met them, they're not in my order because I have raised them. And it's always, since initially I put a couple of ads out, like I said, to try and start the ball rolling. Since then, I've met people. I've even met them at Stonehenge. And funnily enough, Stonehenge, for the summer solstice, there are people who come from all over the world to be there solstice morning. Pilgrims, pagans from all around the world, from the Americas, from Asia, from Africa, from everywhere. And often I will induct them into my order. I will make them a knight. I will raise them, and they'll go off into the world, and I may never see them ever again. But they will follow that truth, honor, and justice, and it spreads. And sometimes, of course, I will meet them again, whether it be at Stonehenge or whether it be on a protest during the 90s. That a lot of the people came to me because I was the head of a protest, or because we were up the trees trying to save them, and we were fighting for the environment in that manner. And so people have often come up to me over the years, and a friend of mine, she always says, all these serious people, and this is what she says, all these serious people, you know, they all go beneath the sword. And you know why? And people will say to her, why? Just in case he's right. Maybe he really is, Arthur. But some of the people, I mean, you're there at a history club at a university. There is a writer over here called Professor Ronald Hutton, who is head of history at Bristol University. And we went head to head, as it were, at a pagan gathering, and it was an academic thing. And before we went on, I said to him, let's swap places, right? So I was supposed to be arguing that Arthur existed. He was supposed to be arguing that Arthur didn't. So I said, let's change this. I'll argue that I don't exist and never did. You can argue that he does. So anyway, at the end of the argument, Professor Ronald Hutton turned around and said, it's all academic anyway. I'm one of his knights. So there are a number of university people, right, as well as a number of what we call the great unwashed in my order. And we're all warriors and we all fight in different ways, but we all fight for truth, honor, and justice.
That's so cool. I have another question, which is, what do you think, I guess, the modern person, the urbanized person, what is something that the spirit of King Arthur and something that you can teach? What do you think that would do for somebody who lives in cities or who is a modern person, I guess, and or secular or unbelieving, I guess?
Yeah, and a lot of people have come to my order like that, right, and there are a lot of what we over here would call urban druids, and there are a lot of keyboard warriors that I'm sure you're familiar with that term. But basically, I teach the ancient virtues of truth, honor, and justice, and I hold them up as an ideal for people to follow and to live by. And that's what I teach. I teach truth, honor, and justice. But it's not my truth. It's not my honor. It's not my justice. It's theirs. As I say to people after I raise them up as a member of my order, I say, look, truth merely means if you say it, do it. That's honor. It's the honorable thing to do. If you say it, follow it through. That's honor. Okay? Justice, like beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder. If you know it's wrong, just don't bloody do it. And if you see someone doing something wrong, call them out. And what I do is I do it on a national level. I call them out. I'm always taking judicial reviews against the government and doing stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that the members of my order don't call them out, even if it's their sister, their brother, their father, their next door neighbor. If they see it is wrong, call them out. So it's just literally all I teach and all I want to teach is the ancient virtues of truth, honor, and justice.
That's cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the audience? So when you first tell people that you are King Arthur, how do people typically react?
Laugh, generally. But I don't, you see, I don't go around saying, oi, I'm King Arthur. I'd say, all right, mate. And they say, all right, what's your name? I say, Arthur. I'm Arthur. King is an honorary title. I am a king because I'm king. I'm right. Let's be very practical about this. My name is Arthur Uther Pendragon. Right? That is my name. That is legally my name. So I am Arthur, and I am king of my order. I'm king of, I'm not king of Britain. It's Charles's job. I wouldn't want his job. I'm only king of people who want me as their king. So my job's a lot easier than his. And I don't go around saying I'm King Arthur. I just go around saying I'm Arthur. I'm known as King Arthur, and I hold the equivalent rank of an archdruid, being the head of a druid order. But I don't even go around calling myself an archdruid. I just my name's Arthur, and people often say to me, "You're not that King Arthur, are you?" And then I say, "Well, yeah, as it goes." So yeah, a lot of people know me, who I am, because they've heard of my reputation. It usually goes before me. I'm fairly infamous with the police, so the police always know who they're dealing with. But other than that, I don't go around claiming to be King Arthur. I just claim to be Arthur, and I just happen to be a king, so I'm a King Arthur.
Very nice. Any other questions? Anything? Last call. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today. It's been a fascinating time. We've really enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm recorded it, so I'll be sure to get you a link to that, and I'll share with our other club members.
That you broke up. I didn't hear
Oh,
that.
I said that we emailed about this before, but I had recorded this, so I'll be sure to send you a link and I'll distribute it to our club members. We had a lot of people who said they'd love to hear it, but weren't able to attend today, so I hope we're able to spread it around campus. Thank you so much. We really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah. And when you do, just send me a link. Yeah.
Will do. Thank you. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Again.